The voice that escaped John's lips was wrong. It wasn't a hoarse whisper or the slurred confusion of sedation. It was crisp, articulate, and carried the rounded vowels of a dialect from a coastal town 800 miles away. A place he had never visited. The attending nurse froze, her pen clattering to the floor. The air in the room thickened, suddenly tasting of ozone and the faint metallic tang of old copper. John tried to scream, to reclaim the muscles of his own throat. But the foreign voice only grew steadier, asking a question in a language he did not understand. This was no medical anomaly. It was an unwelcome guest, speaking through borrowed flesh. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger wearing your face, staring back. This wasn't some science fiction movie plot. It was the chilling reality that confronted Michael Shaw. For 300 days, he simply vanished. And when he finally came back, something else came back with him. Michael Shaw from Austin, Texas, a structural engineer, a devoted husband to Sarah. His life was built on logic, blueprints, and the comforting, slow drawl of his home state. A man whose world was about to be measured in whispers and the weight of something unseen. His world was solid, predictable, a comfortable rhythm he knew by heart. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, that rhythm fractured. A truck, a massive shadow through the downpour, lost its purchase on the wet asphalt. It hydroplaned, a ton of metal and momentum, carving a silent, inevitable path directly toward him. The screech of tearing metal, the crush of steel. Nothing. The trauma to Michael's brain was catastrophic, leaving him in a deep, persistent, vegetative state. Doctors delivered the prognosis with clinical detachment, each word a hammer blow to Sarah's fragile hope. The word, hope, began to taste like ash in her mouth. A cruel and bitter joke whispered by fate. Sarah came every day without fail. She spun his favorite Willie Nelson records, the vinyl crackling like distant fire. She read him Texas Rangers scores, her voice steady against the sterile silence. She held his limp hand, waiting for any flicker of the man she once knew. For 300 days, Michael existed as a phantom within his own flesh, a prisoner behind unresponsive eyes. Sarah clung to his limp hand, the only warmth in a room that smelled of antiseptic and sterile dread. Then, without warning or reason, the ghost simply departed. The steady, metronomic beat of the heart monitor was the only sound marking the impossible shift. A close-up on Michael's finger twitching. Then, his eyelids fluttered open. He woke not with a gasp, but with a slow, bewildered blink. Sarah wept, a relief so profound it shook the quiet hospital wing. But when she leaned in, through the tears, to hear his first words, the air turned frigid. Michael, oh, où suis-je? Narrated. Where am I? In perfect, Parisian accented French, a language Michael had failed in high school. Sarah stared, a laugh trapped in her throat. A bizarre, oxygen-starved joke, she thought, but it wasn't. Doctors and neurologists gathered in conference, their expressions grave. Brain scans illuminated screens in the darkened room. As Michael regained strength, the abnormality within him solidified. The sterile scent of antiseptic couldn't mask the creeping dread that now filled the air. His familiar Texas drawl had vanished completely, replaced by a fluid, precise French accent that colored even his English words. Then came the cravings: espresso, sharp cheeses, foods he'd once detested with a visceral aversion. The scent of bitter coffee and aged dairy now hung in the air around him, a strange perfume where none had been before. Each new preference felt like a cold, damp fingerprint pressed against his mind, leaving a sticky residue of wrongness. His hands, once precise instruments, fumbled clumsily with simple tools. Complex classical compositions now grated against his ears, replaced by a sudden preference for twangy country music. Sarah's voice, raw with emotion, cuts through an interview style. It was Michael, but it was like someone had edited him. They'd taken out his soul and put in a polite, foreign exchange student. He'd stare at our wedding photos with the hollow gaze of a stranger observing another's memories. The diagnosis was chillingly rare. Foreign accent syndrome, fused with a complete personality shift. Typically triggered by stroke, here it was born from profound trauma. His brain had violently rewired itself to survive, igniting dormant neural pathways. But for the eerie transformation of his very essence, the doctors had no answers. Was it just random neural misfiring, or was it something far more deliberate? Michael moved through his own home like a stranger in a museum, his fingers tracing familiar surfaces that now felt alien and cold. The man who now occupied Michael's life was contemplative, given to deep melancholy, and haunted by a quiet dread he couldn't name. Every room carried the faint, metallic scent of ozone, and the silence wasn't empty. It was watchful. The old Michael was an extrovert, a backslapping companion who thrived in company. This new Michael had no recollection of those faces, their names lost in a fog. One evening, Sarah discovered him on the porch, weeping quietly in the damp air. He wasn't mourning his vanished past, but a nameless, suffocating dread he couldn't articulate. Michael's voice grew distant, as if describing a memory from another lifetime. He spoke of a haunting nostalgia for a place he'd never visited, a life he'd never lived. This body, this history, he whispered, felt like a suit that didn't fit. The air in the room grew thick with the metallic scent of ozone, a strange electricity that made the hairs on your arms stand up. Outside, a low, rumbling thunder began to build, a deep vibration that you felt in your chest more than heard. Then, the dreams began, vivid, relentless, not of Texas, but of narrow, cobblestone streets that smelled of damp stone and ozone. Michael grew agitated, pacing his room as the images refused to fade. Finally, he snatched his notebook and began scribbling furiously, trying to capture what his waking mind couldn't hold. He dreamt of baking bread in wet stone, of a specific bridge over a river, and a small bookstore with a green door. Then, his sleeping mind began to compulsively sketch maps. I googled it. It was the Latin Quarter. Precisely. He'd never set foot in France. I pulled out a photograph of the Seine and slid it toward him. His eyes locked onto the image, and his entire body went rigid. Then, a sharp, involuntary flinch, as if the paper had burned him. The memory felt more real than any photograph. Driven by a desperate need to understand, Sarah did the unthinkable. She secretly recorded Michael as he murmured in his sleep. His voice flowed in rapid, fluid French. And as subtitles appeared, they revealed his whispered secret. The book is behind the loose stone. Tell her I am sorry. Tell Annette I could not come home. Annette, a name they had never heard whispered in these halls. The message was a plea for a woman they could not find in any record, any photograph. The air grew thick with the scent of old paper and a faint, metallic tang of something long forgotten. Was this merely his mind weaving an elaborate fiction to cope? Or was it a fragment of something more? The expert theories were clinical, sterile, latent memory, cross-wired impulses. But for Sarah, a more terrifying question took root. Her skin prickled, not with cold, but with a sudden, sticky dread. In a dimly lit room, Michael Shaw stares directly into the camera, his gaze heavy with a sorrow that seems centuries old. He speaks slowly, his voice a near whisper, the words hanging in the cold, still air. The doctors tell me that Michael Shaw is still in here, he says, a faint scent of antiseptic clinging to the room, that he is damaged, but present. A long pause stretches, filled only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of a clock. Then, his voice drops even lower, the question sticky with dread. But what if he is not? What if Michael Shaw, the man you love, truly perished in that wreckage? And I am merely a passenger who discovered a vacant vehicle. So who truly awoke in that Texas hospital bed? The science has a name for the accent, but no name for the soul. Sarah lived with a polite, gentle stranger who wears her husband's face. A broken man? Rebuilt wrong? Or something far more mysterious? The air in their home now carries the faint, metallic scent of ozone and the chilling silence of a held breath. Michael exists in a borrowed life, haunted by the ghost of the man he was meant to be, and the echoes of the person he might have become. As the sun bleeds its final light, he speaks, not to us, but to the gathering twilight. His voice, a fractured whisper in a French accent, carries the weight of a lifetime. Je veux rentrer à la maison. I want to go home. And as the screen surrenders to black, a final question hangs in the void. But which one?